The envelope was thin, too thin to destroy a man's life. Julian Mercer stared at the DNA results while fluorescent hospital lights buzzed above him like dying insects. Down the hall, machines were helping his son breathe. Nurses moved quickly. Doctors whispered in careful tones. And in the center of all that fear, one sentence rewrote 8 years of love: "You are not the biological father." For a moment, Julian could not remember how to stand, or who he had been 5 minutes earlier. The first thing Julian noticed was the silence. Not actual silence. Northwestern Memorial Hospital never slept, but the kind of silence that settles inside a person when reality begins separating from the life they thought they knew. It started at Liam's winter concert. The elementary school auditorium smelled faintly of pine decorations and burnt coffee from the parents' refreshment table. Children stood under soft yellow stage lights, wearing white shirts and nervous smiles, while teachers adjusted microphones that never worked properly. Julian sat in the third row recording everything on his phone. Liam hated being watched when he sang. Every time he spotted the camera, he became stiff and self-conscious, so Julian pretended to film another child until Liam relaxed again. Beside him, Evelyn scrolled through Instagram. Not constantly, not obviously, but enough that Julian noticed. A polished brunette with expensive taste and a talent for looking composed in every situation, Evelyn Mercer carried herself the way wealthy Chicago women often did: controlled posture, measured smile, luxury hidden beneath casual elegance. Even tonight at a children's concert, she looked camera-ready. "You're missing it," Julian whispered. "I'm answering Melissa about Saturday," she murmured without looking up. Liam stepped forward for his solo. His voice trembled at first, then steadied. Julian smiled automatically, pride swelling in his chest with the familiar ache only parenthood creates. Liam had Julian's quiet nature, his carefulness, his habit of overthinking simple things. Or at least Julian had always believed so. Halfway through the second verse, Liam stopped singing. At first, the audience assumed he forgot the lyrics. Then the boy swayed. One of the teachers rushed forward just as Liam collapsed onto the stage floor. The room erupted. Parents stood. Children screamed. Someone shouted for a nurse. Julian was already moving before his brain caught up his shoulder slamming into the aisle as he pushed past rows of chairs. Liam. His son's skin looked terrifyingly pale. Liam's eyes fluttered weakly while teachers backed away in panic. Evelyn dropped beside them, suddenly stripped of her polished calm. "Oh my God, baby, look at me." The ambulance ride became fragments after that. Sirens, oxygen masks, a paramedic asking questions too quickly. Has he experienced dizziness before? Bruising fatigue? Julian answered automatically, while Evelyn cried beside him, gripping Liam's small hand so tightly her knuckles turned white. At the hospital, doctors moved with practiced urgency. Blood work, scans, IV lines. The emergency physician, a tired-looking woman named Dr. Karen Liu, finally approached them near midnight. "We're stabilizing him," she explained carefully, "but his hemoglobin levels are dangerously low. We need additional testing to determine the underlying cause." Evelyn looked close to collapsing herself. "Is it leukemia? We don't know yet." That answer hung over them like smoke. Hours passed inside the harsh fluorescent glow of the pediatric wing. Nurses walked in and out carrying charts. Television screens played muted news no one watched. Somewhere nearby, another child cried endlessly. Julian sat alone eventually because Evelyn went to speak privately with one of the specialists. Or so she said. He rubbed both hands over his face, exhausted beyond thought. That was when the nurse approached. "Mr. Mercer." He looked up. A young nurse handed him a sealed envelope. These were added to Liam's intake file accidentally. "Genetics asked me to bring them over." Julian frowned. Genetics? Their preliminary compatibility screenings connected to the anemia panel. She offered an apologetic smile before walking away. Julian stared at the envelope for several seconds, then opened it. Medical language blurred across the page initially. He skimmed automatically until one line caught his attention. Paternity analysis result. Probability of biological relation 0%. His eyes stopped moving. The hospital corridor suddenly felt too bright, too narrow, too warm. Julian blinked once, certain he had misunderstood. He reread the sentence. Then again, and again. 0%. Not reduced probability, not inconclusive, 0. The sound leaving his throat barely qualified as breathing. For 8 years, he had packed school lunches, tied shoes, held Liam through nightmares, taught him how to ride a bicycle beside freezing Chicago sidewalks. 8 years. Julian looked toward Liam's hospital room through the glass window. His son slept under dim monitors, small and fragile beneath white blankets. Not his son. The thought arrived instantly, and Julian hated himself for thinking it. A second later came another thought, even uglier. Evelyn knew. Of course she knew. Every late-night silence suddenly rearranged itself inside his memory like furniture in a dark room finally exposed to light. The business conference in Boston 2 months before their wedding. Adrian Cole's name appearing once on her phone years ago before she casually dismissed him as ancient history. The strange emotional distance after Liam was born. Julian's stomach twisted violently. He stood so abruptly the chair scraped backward across the floor. A passing nurse glanced over. "You okay, sir?" No, he wasn't. But across the hallway, Evelyn appeared carrying 2 coffees. For one terrifying second, Julian simply stared at her. She smiled automatically when she saw him warm, elegant, familiar. The smile of a woman who had lied to him for nearly a decade. "You should try to rest," she said softly. "The doctor said it could be a long night." Julian looked at her as if seeing her for the first time. Did she ever love me? The question hit harder than the betrayal itself. Evelyn noticed something change in his face immediately. "What's wrong?" Julian folded the DNA results slowly. His hands no longer felt steady. Behind Evelyn, snow drifted past the hospital windows in soft white waves covering Chicago in deceptive beauty. He realized then that some lies were not impulsive mistakes. Some lies were architectures. Carefully built, carefully maintained, and eventually designed to bury someone alive. The snow kept falling for 3 days after Liam was hospitalized. Chicago looked softer beneath it, cleaner. Julian had never hated beauty more. By Friday morning, the city outside their condo windows glowed white and silver under weak winter sunlight, while inside the Mercer home, everything felt contaminated. Every object carried memory now. The espresso cups Evelyn liked from Milan, the framed beach photo from Cape Cod, the gray cashmere blanket they bought together during their first Christmas as newlyweds. 8 years of marriage suddenly resembled a crime scene, and Julian could no longer stop examining evidence. He moved carefully through the apartment while Evelyn showered upstairs. Liam was still under observation at the hospital stable, but weak, and the silence without him felt unnatural. Julian opened the refrigerator automatically. Orange juice, organic fruit, Liam's favorite strawberry yogurt. Normal things. That was the worst part. Betrayal never arrived looking monstrous at first. It lived inside ordinary routines. Inside grocery lists and folded laundry and kisses goodbye before work. Inside trust. His phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. "Evelyn, can you bring my laptop charger when you come later?" Julian stared at the message. No heart emoji today. No love you. Maybe she sensed something already, or maybe guilt had simply made her cautious years ago. He typed back, "Sure, nothing else." For several seconds, he considered confronting her immediately. He imagined throwing the DNA results onto the hospital bed between them. Imagined watching her expression collapse in real time. But another instinct stopped him. A colder instinct. If Evelyn had hidden something this enormous for nearly a decade, then emotional confrontation alone would never uncover the full truth. People who lied that long learned how to survive panic. No, Julian needed facts first. He walked slowly into Evelyn's home office. The room smelled faintly of expensive perfume and eucalyptus candles. Clean, organized, controlled, like her. Her laptop sat closed beside stacked nonprofit paperwork from the Children's Foundation where she served as fundraising director. Beside it rested a leather-bound planner filled with elegant handwriting. Julian hesitated, then opened the first drawer. Nothing unusual initially. Receipts, stationery, tax forms. But once he started looking closely, small inconsistencies emerged everywhere. Hotel invoices, airport parking charges, dinner receipts from places Evelyn claimed never to visit anymore. One receipt stopped him completely. The Asher Room, Gold Coast, Chicago. 2 guests. Date, March 14th. Julian remembered March 14th. Evelyn had told him she spent that weekend at a women's charity retreat in Milwaukee. He stared at the receipt until the numbers blurred. 2 guests. His chest tightened painfully. There was more. He opened her planner. Most pages contained harmless scheduling notes, meetings, luncheons, fundraising events, but certain dates carried only a single handwritten letter. A C, repeated over months, sometimes years apart, sometimes twice in the same week. Julian's jaw tightened. Adrian Cole. Even writing the name mentally made something ugly move through him. Dr. Adrian Cole was everything Julian instinctively distrusted about wealthy Chicago men: polished confidence, inherited privilege, old money charm disguised as humility. A respected cardiologist with appearances in health magazines and charity galas. The kind of man people trusted immediately because he knew exactly how to perform decency. Julian had met him only 4 times. Each interaction now replayed differently in his memory. Especially one. 5 years earlier at a fundraising dinner. Adrian had shaken Julian's hand warmly, while Evelyn stood beside them in a black silk dress. Julian remembered noticing the strange tension in her posture that night. Tiny. Almost invisible. "You're a lucky man," Adrian had said casually, smiling at Evelyn a second too long. At the time, Julian interpreted it as harmless nostalgia between former lovers. Now the memory made him feel sick. His phone vibrated again, this time from the hospital. Liam asking if Julian could bring his blue headphones. The message nearly broke him, because no matter what the DNA said, Liam still texted him first when he was scared. Julian sat down slowly in Evelyn's office chair. Then he opened their shared banking account. At first glance, nothing appeared unusual. They were wealthy enough that large transactions rarely attracted attention. But Julian was an architect. Details were his profession. Patterns mattered. And once he started tracing expenses carefully, another hidden structure began revealing itself beneath their marriage. Monthly deposits. Always different amounts. Always routed through intermediary accounts, but originating from the same source. A C Medical Consulting Group. Julian's stomach dropped. He clicked deeper. Payments spanning nearly 7 years. Not enormous enough to trigger suspicion individually, large enough collectively to change everything. Luxury spa memberships. Partial mortgage transfers. Liam's private school tuition 1 semester. Jesus Christ. Julian leaned back slowly, feeling physically cold. Adrian had been financing parts of their life. Not openly, secretly, like a man maintaining something he believed belonged to him. The realization ignited something dangerous inside Julian, not explosive rage, but humiliation so profound it became almost silent. Had they laughed at him privately? Had Adrian looked at Julian during school events, knowing the truth the entire time Julian closed his eyes briefly? Another memory surfaced immediately. Liam's birth. Evelyn had barely let Julian into the delivery room emotionally. She'd seemed distant afterward, too, detached in ways he blamed on postpartum depression. But now, he remembered one particular night 3 months after Liam was born. Evelyn standing alone in their kitchen at 2 a.m., crying quietly while holding her phone. Julian had wrapped his arms around her from behind. "What's wrong?" "Nothing," she whispered too quickly. Then she turned the screen off immediately. At the time, he believed she was simply exhausted from motherhood. Now he wondered who she had really been talking to. A sound upstairs interrupted him, water shutting off. Evelyn finishing her shower. Julian quickly photographed the receipts and payment records with his phone before closing everything exactly as he found it. By the time Evelyn entered the kitchen wearing cream-colored cashmere and damp hair, Julian was pouring coffee calmly. She studied him carefully. "You didn't sleep. Neither did you," he thought. Instead, he said, "How's Liam this morning?" "He asked for you. That hurt more than anything else." Evelyn moved closer, slowly searching his expression. "You seem distant." Julian handed her coffee. Their fingers touched briefly. For years, that touch had represented comfort, partnership, intimacy. Now it felt like contact with someone capable of destroying him while smiling gently enough to hide it. "I'm tired," he answered. Evelyn nodded, but suspicion flickered behind her eyes. She knew him too well. Or perhaps she feared the exact moment every liar eventually fears, the moment the other person finally sees clearly. "You should go home tonight," she said softly. "I can stay with Liam." Julian looked at her over the rim of his coffee cup. "Why so Adrian can visit?" The thought came instantly now. Poisonously. Every explanation suddenly contained another possible meaning. No, Julian replied evenly. I'll stay. A beat passed. Evelyn forced a small smile. Okay, but tension remained suspended between them like invisible wire. Later that afternoon, Julian returned alone to the hospital cafeteria for coffee. That was when he saw Adrian. The doctor stepped off the elevator carrying flowers. Not generic hospital flowers, Liam's favorite blue irises. Julian stopped walking. Adrian froze too. For one long moment, neither man spoke. Then Adrian recovered first with polished composure. Julian, he said warmly, I heard about Liam. I came as soon as Evelyn told me. Of course she did. Julian stared at the flowers. Blue irises. Specific, personal, not the choice of a distant family friend. Something shifted behind Adrian's calm expression then. Recognition. Not guilt exactly, fear. Because Adrian suddenly understood something terrifying Julian knew. And for the first time in years, the perfect architecture of their deception had begun to crack. The confrontation began quietly. That was what Evelyn would remember later, the absence of shouting at first. No broken glass, no dramatic accusations. Only the terrifying calm of a man who had already suffered the worst part privately and no longer feared the answer. Outside Chicago drowned beneath freezing rain. Water streaked across the hospital windows in silver lines, while evening traffic blurred into red and white smears below the pediatric wing. Liam was finally sleeping after another round of blood transfusions. Julian stood near the window watching the city instead of his wife. Who else knows? His voice was low, controlled. Evelyn froze beside the hospital coffee machine. For several seconds, she said nothing. Julian turned slowly. Her face lost color almost instantly. Not confusion, recognition. She knew exactly what he meant. Julian? He reached into his coat pocket and placed the folded DNA results on the table between them. The room became unbearably still. Evelyn stared at the paper like it might explode. Then her knees nearly gave out. Oh my God. The whisper barely existed. Julian watched her carefully, almost clinically now. 8 years together had taught him every version of her expressions. Anger, seduction, grief, annoyance. But this was different. This was the face of someone realizing the lie was finally dead. You knew, he said. Not a question. Evelyn pressed trembling fingers against her mouth. Tears filled her eyes immediately, but Julian felt strangely untouched by them now. When he asked, she shook her head weakly. Please, not here. When did you know Liam might not be mine? The sharpness in his voice made a nearby nurse glance toward them before walking away uncomfortably. Evelyn lowered herself slowly into the chair across from him. For a moment she looked older than he had ever seen her. Not physically, emotionally, like the weight of years had arrived all at once. I never knew for certain, she whispered. Julian laughed once. Cold, disbelieving. That's your defense, no. You let me raise him for 8 years without certainty. I loved you. The answer came too fast, too desperate. Julian's jaw tightened violently. That isn't what I asked. Evelyn began crying openly now, but quietly, carefully, like someone terrified of drawing attention. Across the hallway, monitors beeped steadily inside Liam's room. Their son. Not their son. Julian no longer knew which thought hurt more. Was it Adrian, he asked flatly. Evelyn closed her eyes. And that was enough. Julian looked away immediately, breathing once through his nose as if controlling something dangerous inside himself. How long? It wasn't continuous. The choice of words disgusted him instantly. Not continuous, as if technical phrasing somehow softened betrayal. How long, Evelyn? She wiped tears from her cheeks with shaking hands. We were together briefly before the wedding. Julian stared at her. Briefly? Yes. How brief? Silence. Then 4 months. The number hit harder than he expected. 4 months. Not one mistake. Not drunken regret. A relationship. A hidden parallel life existing beneath their engagement. You were sleeping with him while planning our wedding. Evelyn looked down. Yes. Julian felt something collapse internally, then not explosive pain anymore, but structural damage. Like a building finally realizing its foundation had been rotten for years. Why marry me? Her head lifted immediately. Because I loved you. You loved him too. No. Her answer came instantly. Not the same way. Julian almost smiled at that. The absurdity. You let another man possibly father your child while promising forever to me in front of our families. Her breathing became uneven. I found out I was pregnant after we stopped seeing each other. You mean after you stopped getting caught? That's not fair. The words escaped her before she realized how terrible they sounded. Julian leaned back slowly in his chair. For the first time since opening the DNA results, actual anger surfaced visibly across his face. Fair? His voice dropped lower. You want to discuss fairness? Evelyn's eyes filled again. Julian, please? No. You don't get to cry your way out of this conversation anymore. The sentence landed like a slap, because both of them knew it was true. For years, emotion had protected Evelyn from consequences. Tears ended arguments. Vulnerability redirected accountability. Sadness softened suspicion. But tonight, Julian looked at her differently. Not as his wife, as a witness. A suspect. A stranger wearing familiar skin. When did Adrian find out? Julian asked. Evelyn hesitated too long. His stomach turned. Oh my God, he whispered. He knew, he suspected, when after Liam was born. Julian stood abruptly and walked toward the window again. Chicago glittered below them like another universe entirely. He pressed one hand against his mouth briefly. Adrian knew. Maybe not with certainty, but enough. Enough to send money. Enough to stay close. Enough to walk into hospitals carrying Liam's favorite flowers. Julian spoke without turning around. Did everyone laugh at me? No! The force in Evelyn's answer echoed through the room. No one laughed at you. But you both knew we tried to move on. The words sliced through him. Julian turned back slowly. Evelyn immediately realized the mistake. I didn't mean, how many times after the wedding? Her face crumpled. Julian, how many? Silence stretched. Long enough. His chest tightened painfully. It continued. Not a question now. Evelyn finally nodded once. Small, ashamed. Yes. Something inside Julian hardened permanently. How long? On and off for years. Years. Not a marriage damaged by one betrayal. An entire relationship poisoned from instinct. He walked toward her slowly. What does on and off mean? Evelyn began shaking harder now. It was complicated. No, it was dishonest. She looked up at him helplessly. I was trying to end it, but never did. I did eventually, when... Another silence. Julian already knew the answer before she spoke. About a year ago. 1 year of faithfulness after nearly a decade of deception. How generous. Julian laughed again quietly, the sound stripped of warmth. Evelyn suddenly stood and grabbed his arm. I know how horrible this is. You don't? I do. You have absolutely no idea what you've done to me. The rawness in his voice finally broke through the control. Evelyn started crying harder. I never wanted to hurt you, but you protected yourself every single day. He pulled his arm away carefully, not violently. That somehow hurt her more. You watched me love Liam, he continued. You watched me build my entire life around this family, while knowing it might all be based on a lie. He is your son. Julian looked at her sharply. Don't. You raised him. He loves you. That doesn't erase what you did. Evelyn covered her face briefly. I was scared of what? Losing everything? There it was. The truth beneath all the others. Not passion, not confusion, fear of losing stability. Reputation, marriage, the beautiful life Julian provided. You should have told me before the wedding. I know. You should have told me when Liam was born. I know. You should have told me every single day afterward. Evelyn broke completely then. Not elegant crying anymore. Real crying. Ugly. Shaking. I know. Several people turned toward them outside the waiting room. Julian lowered his voice immediately. Then why didn't you? Her answer came out fractured between sobs. Because every year it became harder. Every year you loved him more. Every year I thought telling you would destroy all of us. Julian stared at her. And for one brief, terrible second, he saw the frightened young woman she used to be instead of the liar she became. That almost made it worse. Because somewhere along the way, love had existed here. Real love, corrupted by cowardice. "Did Adrian ever want you back?" Julian asked quietly. Evelyn hesitated. Again. And Julian felt the final piece click into place. He did. He thought Liam might be his. "And you kept both lives going." "No, you kept us both." Evelyn's silence confirmed it. Julian stepped backward slowly, as if distance itself suddenly mattered. Years of hidden messages, secret meetings, private grief, private desire, an entire emotional history existing beside their marriage like a second invisible relationship, and somehow the cruelest part remained Liam. A child now trapped inside consequences he never created. Julian looked through the glass into the hospital room. Liam slept peacefully beneath pale blue blankets, unaware his entire world was beginning to split apart outside the door. Julian spoke without looking at Evelyn. "Does he know no? He will someday." The sentence hollowed the air between them. Evelyn began crying again quietly. "What happens now?" she whispered. Julian finally looked at her fully. And for the first time in their marriage, she seemed genuinely afraid of him, not physically, but emotionally. Because the man standing before her was no longer blindly in love. He was thinking clearly now. And clarity was far more dangerous. "I don't know yet," he said calmly. Then, after a long pause, "But I'm going to know everything." 3 days after the confrontation, Evelyn posted a family photo on Instagram. Julian saw it while sitting beside Liam's hospital bed at 2:14 in the morning. The caption read, "Hard week. Holding close the people who matter most. Grateful for love, family, and prayers." A white heart emoji. A photo from Thanksgiving. The three of them smiling beneath warm dining room lights, while Liam grinned with missing front teeth between his parents. Perfect. Completely fictional. Julian stared at the image until disgust replaced disbelief. Nearly 4,000 likes within an hour. Comments flooded underneath from friends, donors, socialites, mothers from Liam's private school. "You two are such a strong couple. Praying for sweet Liam. Your family is beautiful." Julian almost threw the phone across the room. Instead, he locked the screen carefully and looked toward the sleeping child beside him. Liam looked smaller every day inside the hospital bed. The bruising beneath his eyes had deepened, and the constant blood tests left tiny purple marks along his thin arms. Yet somehow he still smiled whenever Julian walked into the room, still reached for him instinctively, still called him Dad without hesitation. That word hurt differently now. Not less. Worse. Because Julian no longer knew whether he had the right to need it so badly. "You okay?" The voice startled him. Liam was awake, blinking slowly beneath dim lighting. Julian immediately softened his expression. "Yeah, buddy. You looked angry." Julian glanced toward the darkened phone screen. "Just tired." Liam studied him for a moment with frightening intelligence. Children noticed emotional weather long before adults admitted storms existed. "Are you and Mom fighting?" The question landed softly, directly. Julian leaned back in the chair beside the bed. "A little, because of me." The ache that followed nearly stopped his breathing. "No," Julian said immediately. "Never because of you." Liam nodded slowly, but uncertainty lingered across his face. He had always been observant. Quiet children usually were. Julian remembered teaching him chess at 6 years old. Liam barely spoke during games, but he watched everything carefully before making decisions. Now those same careful eyes moved between his parents constantly, measuring silence, tracking tension, trying to understand why warmth disappeared from rooms the moment adults thought he wasn't looking. "Mom cries a lot lately," Liam whispered. Julian swallowed hard. "She's scared, are you?" The honesty of children was merciless. Julian looked away briefly toward the snowy Chicago skyline outside the window. "Yes," he admitted. Liam reached for his hand weakly. Julian took it instantly. No DNA result in the world could change reflex like that. "I'm scared too," Liam murmured. Julian squeezed his fingers gently. "I know." For several minutes, neither spoke again. The heart monitor beeped steadily between them, while city lights flickered against the glass like distant stars. Then the door opened quietly. Evelyn entered carrying fresh clothes and coffee. The moment her eyes found Julian, something tightened subtly in her posture. They had become actors now, not lovers. Co-parents performing normalcy for a frightened child. "Hey, baby," she whispered warmly to Liam. "How are you feeling better?" She kissed his forehead carefully before placing coffee near Julian without meeting his eyes. "Thanks," he said automatically. The word felt mechanical. Evelyn sat beside Liam and began smoothing his hair gently. From a distance, they still resembled a loving family surviving a medical crisis together. And maybe that was the cruelest part. Fragments of truth still existed inside the lie. Evelyn really did love Liam. Julian believed she once truly loved him too, but love without honesty eventually became performance. And Julian was beginning to notice how much of Evelyn's life depended on performance, especially publicly. 2 days later, Liam was stable enough for short walks through the pediatric wing. Julian returned from speaking with doctors and stopped abruptly outside the room. Adrian was inside, laughing softly with Liam. The sight ignited immediate fury. Not because Adrian was present, because he looked comfortable, natural, like a man unconsciously stepping into a role he secretly imagined belonged to him. Liam smiled from the hospital bed while Adrian adjusted a New York Yankees cap on his head. "Your mom says you still hate the Red Sox." "They suck," Liam answered weakly. Adrian laughed. Julian's stomach twisted violently. "Your mom says, not Evelyn. Your mom." Possessive language slipped out naturally around intimacy. Adrian looked up, then noticed Julian standing at the doorway. The smile disappeared immediately. "Julian." His voice shifted carefully professional. Julian entered slowly. "You're here often." The sentence carried no warmth. Adrian stood. "Evelyn asked me to check on him. I wasn't aware cardiologists specialized in anemia." A pause. Liam looked between them uncertainly. Adrian recovered first. "I was nearby." Julian nodded once. "Of course you were." Because this hospital had quietly become Adrian's emotional territory too. The realization sickened him. "Can we get milkshakes later?" Liam asked suddenly, trying desperately to normalize the atmosphere. Julian forced his expression softer. "If the doctor says yes." "Chocolate?" "Obviously." Liam smiled faintly. Adrian watched the exchange with an unreadable expression. Not jealousy exactly, something more painful, longing. And Julian understood then with horrifying clarity. Adrian loved Liam too. Maybe secretly, maybe guiltily, but genuinely. That complicated everything, because monsters were easier to hate than human beings. After Liam fell asleep again, Adrian followed Julian into the hallway. The silence between them felt electrically dangerous. Finally, Adrian spoke. "How much did Evelyn tell you?" Julian looked at him coldly. "Enough." Adrian exhaled slowly. Neither man moved. Doctors and nurses passed nearby while the two of them stood inside the wreckage of a life none of them knew how to repair. "I never wanted this," Adrian said quietly. Julian almost laughed. "You slept with my wife for years. It ended." "After or before you helped pay my son's tuition?" Adrian's face tightened immediately. "Good." Julian wanted him uncomfortable. "You looked through their finances," Adrian realized. "Our finances." The correction came sharply. Adrian rubbed one hand across his jaw, exhausted. "I tried to stay away, but didn't." A beat passed. Then Julian asked the question poisoning him for days. "Did you know Liam was yours?" Adrian looked toward the hospital room window before answering. "I suspected." Rage flashed through Julian instantly. "You let another man raise your child." Adrian's eyes hardened slightly. He had a father. The statement hit harder than Julian expected, because Adrian wasn't speaking defensively. He sounded sincere. Julian stepped closer. Then why stay involved? Adrian hesitated. For the first time, genuine pain surfaced across his face. Because loving someone and losing them aren't always the same thing. The answer lingered heavily between them. Julian suddenly understood something ugly and complicated. Evelyn had not been juggling two meaningless affairs. These people had remained emotionally connected for nearly a decade, not just physically, emotionally. That made the betrayal feel endless. Back inside the room, Evelyn sat beside Liam scrolling through her phone. Julian noticed notification after notification appearing across her screen. Comments, messages, social invitations. Sympathy from people still believing in the illusion she carefully maintained. That night, she attended a charity board dinner despite everything happening. Julian watched her prepare at home silently. Black dress, diamond earrings, perfect makeup covering exhaustion. "How can you even think about social events right now?" he finally asked. Evelyn paused while fastening an earring. "I can't disappear from my life." Julian stared at her reflection in the mirror. "Your life?" Tension filled the bedroom instantly. Evelyn lowered her hands slowly. "I'm trying to hold things together." "No," Julian said quietly. "You're trying to protect appearances." Her expression cracked slightly. "You think this is easy for me." Julian looked at her for several long seconds. "Then, I don't think you've understood yet what you destroyed." The words landed with deadly precision. Evelyn's eyes filled immediately, but Julian no longer moved to comfort her. That instinct had finally died. Later that evening after she left, Julian wandered through the condo alone. The silence felt unbearable now. Every room carried traces of a marriage already decomposing beneath the surface. He stopped beside the family portrait hanging near the staircase. 3 smiling faces, one giant lie. But as he stared at Liam's expression, another realization settled heavily inside him. Whatever happened next, divorce scandal, humiliation, revenge, a child would survive the blast radius. And somewhere beneath Julian's growing anger, something colder and more strategic was beginning to form. Because pain alone no longer interested him. Truth did. And truth, Julian realized, could destroy people far more completely than rage ever could. By January, Chicago had become a city of ice. Wind howled between skyscrapers hard enough to shake windows, and Lake Michigan looked like cracked steel beneath pale winter light. The entire city felt suspended in cold tension. Julian understood the feeling. For weeks, he had lived inside 2 separate versions of himself. One remained publicly functional. He attended meetings, answered emails, sat beside Liam during treatments, nodded politely at doctors and neighbors offering sympathy. The other version watched everything, calculated, collected, waited, and slowly the grief inside him began changing shape, not disappearing, hardening. The first person Julian called was not a lawyer. It was Daniel Reeves, a forensic accountant specializing in high-asset divorces and financial concealment cases across Chicago. Julian knew him casually through a luxury hotel renovation project years earlier. Daniel was in his early 50s, sharp-eyed, emotionally detached, and frighteningly patient, the kind of man who could identify fraud from a spreadsheet faster than most people recognized faces. They met inside a quiet steakhouse downtown. No music, no crowds. Just dark wood walls and businessmen speaking softly over expensive whiskey. Daniel reviewed the copied bank statements without interrupting. After 20 minutes, he finally looked up. "How much do you want to know?" Julian didn't hesitate. "Everything." Daniel leaned back slightly. "Careful with that answer." "I'm past careful." "No," Daniel corrected calmly. "You're emotional. That's different." The sentence irritated Julian instantly because it was true. Daniel tapped the financial records. "These transfers are structured intelligently, small enough to avoid obvious scrutiny. Irregular timing, routed through consulting accounts. Meaning whoever arranged this didn't want the money traced easily." Julian stared down at the pages. Adrian. Of course, a wealthy physician familiar with legal protections and financial discretion. How long? Daniel adjusted his glass. "Initial estimate, 6 to 7 years. Julian felt physically ill despite expecting the answer. Daniel continued, "There's more interesting activity around the period before your marriage." Julian looked up sharply. "What kind of activity?" "Apartment lease payments, prenatal medical expenses, travel reimbursements." He paused. "And one very expensive clinic consultation." A cold sensation crawled slowly down Julian's spine. What consultation? Daniel slid a photocopied invoice across the table. "Confidential paternity consultation. Date 8 weeks before wedding." Julian stopped breathing for a moment. 8 weeks. Before the wedding. Meaning Evelyn knew uncertainty existed before she walked down the aisle toward him. Not suspicion. Knowledge. He stared at the paper until the letters blurred. Daniel watched him carefully. "She manipulated the timeline," he said quietly. Julian's jaw tightened. "How?" Based on these medical records, she adjusted the reported conception dates after Liam was born. Why? To make paternity statistically favor you. The simplicity of the answer made it more horrifying. Not panic. Planning. Evelyn had engineered the narrative intentionally. Julian suddenly remembered her insistence on changing their wedding date unexpectedly. At the time, she claimed venue availability forced the adjustment. Now, every memory rearranged itself again. God, even their wedding photos felt contaminated now. "You have children?" Julian asked abruptly. Daniel blinked once at the unexpected question. "Yes." Julian nodded slowly. "Then you understand this isn't about money." Daniel studied him for several quiet seconds. "No," he said finally. "This is about humiliation." The word landed perfectly, because humiliation was different from heartbreak. Heartbreak wounded privately. Humiliation infected identity itself. Every school event, every Father's Day card, every moment, Adrian silently observed Julian raising a child that might biologically belong to him. Humiliation turned memory poisonous. "What do people usually do?" Julian asked. Daniel gave a humorless smile. "The smart ones, they stay quiet until they have leverage. And the stupid ones, they confront too early and lose control emotionally." Julian looked out the restaurant window toward the frozen city streets. "I'm not interested in screaming matches." "That's good." "No," Julian said softly. "It's worse." Daniel understood immediately, and for the first time that evening he looked slightly concerned. 3 days later, Julian met with attorney Vanessa Holloway inside her office, overlooking the Chicago River. Unlike Daniel, Vanessa specialized in destruction. Elegant, ruthlessly intelligent, impossibly composed. The kind of divorce attorney wealthy people feared hearing about at dinner parties. She reviewed the evidence silently, while Julian explained everything. When he finished, she closed the folder carefully. "Do you want divorce?" she asked, "or devastation?" Julian almost answered immediately, then stopped himself. Because surprisingly, revenge alone no longer satisfied him emotionally. What he wanted was clarity. Control. Truth exposed completely. "I want consequences," he said finally. Vanessa nodded slowly. "That's more dangerous." She outlined options methodically. Financial tracing, custody positioning, public exposure risks, potential medical ethics investigations into Adrian's financial entanglements. Every sentence sounded terrifyingly surgical. Julian listened quietly. By the end of the meeting, he realized something unsettling. His marriage had already ended emotionally. Now he was planning the burial professionally. That evening, Evelyn hosted friends at their condo for wine, despite Liam still recovering at home. Julian stayed downstairs, initially listening to laughter drift through the house like sounds from another universe. Women discussing charity auctions, vacations in Napa, private schools, social politics. The performance continued flawlessly. At one point, Julian overheard Evelyn speaking near the staircase. "We're stronger than ever," she said lightly. "Honestly, this health scare reminded us what matters." Julian closed his eyes briefly. Stronger than ever. The lie was almost impressive now. Later, after the guests left, Evelyn found him sitting alone in Liam's playroom. Toy trains scattered across the carpet, a half-finished puzzle near the bookshelf. Ordinary evidence of childhood existing beside catastrophic adult failure. "You disappeared tonight," she said softly. Julian didn't answer immediately. Evelyn sat across from him carefully. "I know you hate me." He looked at her, finally. The strange part was, he didn't. Hatred required emotional intimacy. What Julian felt now was colder, more observational. Like watching someone drown inside consequences they still didn't fully understand. "I don't think you realize what's coming," he said quietly. Fear flickered across her face instantly. "What does that mean?" Julian picked up one of Liam's toy chess pieces from the floor. "A black queen. You spent years controlling information," he continued calmly. "Choosing what people knew. Managing timelines, managing narratives." Evelyn's breathing slowed uneasily. "Julian," but eventually he said, turning the chess piece slowly between his fingers, "people lose control of stories." Her eyes widened slightly. She understood now. Not specifics, but direction. "You wouldn't humiliate me publicly," she whispered. The irony nearly made him laugh. "You humiliated me privately for 8 years." "That's different." No, Julian said softly. It really isn't. Evelyn looked suddenly fragile sitting there beneath dim playroom lights. Not glamorous, not socially polished, just exhausted and frightened. For a brief moment, guilt touched him. Then he remembered the consultation invoice, the manipulated dates, the carefully maintained deception before their wedding even began. That feeling disappeared immediately. Does Liam know anything? She asked quietly. Julian's expression shifted at once. No. Please keep it that way. For now. Evelyn lowered her eyes. He already feels the distance between us. Julian looked toward the hallway where Liam's bedroom light glowed faintly upstairs. Children always knew. Maybe not details. But emotional truth leaked through walls no matter how carefully adults performed normalcy. He still loves you, Evelyn whispered. Julian stood slowly. That's the tragedy. Then he walked past her toward the stairs. Halfway up, Evelyn spoke again. Did you ever love me at all? Julian stopped. The question hung painfully between them. Because despite everything, yes, he had. Completely. That was why betrayal this deep felt almost fatal. Without turning around, he answered honestly. I loved you enough to build my entire life around you. Evelyn began crying quietly behind him. But Julian kept walking, and for the first time since discovering the truth, he no longer felt like the weakest person in the marriage. He felt patient, which was far more dangerous. The argument started at 1:17 in the morning. Julian remembered the exact time later because insomnia had become routine by then. Sleep no longer arrived naturally inside the Mercer condo. The house itself seemed infected with tension, every hallway too quiet, every conversation too careful. Liam had returned home from the hospital 4 days earlier. Physically, he was improving. Emotionally, he was watching everything. That frightened Julian more than the medical charts ever had. The fight began downstairs in the kitchen while icy rain hammered against the windows overlooking Chicago. You brought him into my son's hospital room, Julian said sharply. Our son? Evelyn's correction came instantly. Julian laughed once under his breath. There it is again! Evelyn stood near the marble kitchen island, wearing one of Julian's old sweaters, arms folded tightly across herself, as though cold lived inside her now. He wanted to see Liam. And you thought that was your decision to make. He cares about him. The sentence detonated something Julian had been suppressing for weeks. He lost the right to care when he kept sleeping with a married woman. Evelyn flinched visibly. Please lower your voice. No. Julian stepped closer. For 8 years I walked around like some pathetic stand-in while the two of you built a secret life behind my back. That isn't what happened. Then explain it to me. His voice cracked suddenly, not from rage, but exhaustion. Explain how a man secretly pays school tuition for a child that might be his. Evelyn's eyes filled instantly. You think I don't hate myself already? Julian stared at her. No, he said quietly. I think you hate consequences. The words landed brutally. Evelyn looked away as though physically struck. You've turned into someone I don't recognize. Julian almost smiled. No, he answered. I finally became someone who sees you clearly. Silence exploded between them, then a sound upstairs. Small, sharp. A floorboard creaking. Both of them froze. Julian's stomach dropped instantly. Liam. He moved toward the staircase immediately, but another sound followed. This time a bedroom door shutting too quickly. Jesus Christ, Evelyn whispered. Julian took the stairs 2 at a time. By the time he reached Liam's bedroom, the boy was already back in bed pretending to sleep. Badly. The lamp beside the bed cast soft yellow light across his pale face. His breathing came too fast. His eyes remained squeezed shut, with the exaggerated stillness only children believed adults couldn't detect. Julian stood in the doorway for several seconds, then quietly, buddy. Liam's eyes opened immediately. Fear lived inside them. Not confusion anymore. Fear. Julian sat carefully on the edge of the bed. Behind him, Evelyn remained frozen outside the door. Liam looked between them both, then asked the question Julian had been dreading since the hospital. Am I Adrian's kid? The room stopped breathing. Evelyn covered her mouth instantly. Julian felt something inside him collapse quietly. There it was, the truth finally reaching the one person neither of them had managed to protect. Liam, Evelyn whispered. But Liam didn't look at her, only Julian, because despite everything, Julian was still the person he trusted most. The realization nearly destroyed him. "Tell me the truth," Liam said. His voice shook violently now. "You said lying makes things worse." Julian closed his eyes briefly. Children remembered everything. Every lesson, every principle, every promise adults eventually failed to uphold themselves. When he opened his eyes again, Evelyn was crying silently near the doorway. "I'll explain," she started. "No," Liam snapped suddenly. The anger in his small voice shocked all three of them. "I want Dad to answer." "Dad." The word hit Julian like grief and salvation simultaneously. He looked at Liam carefully. This frightened child with dark circles under his eyes. This boy who loved astronomy and hated mushrooms and cried secretly during sad movies. This boy Julian taught to ride a bike beside frozen sidewalks near Lake Michigan. This boy who climbed into Julian's bed during thunderstorms until age 7, not biologically his son, and somehow still completely his. Julian spoke slowly. "Adrian might be your biological father?" Liam's face crumpled instantly. "Might. We're still figuring things out." "That means yes." Evelyn broke down crying harder. "Baby, stop calling me that." The words ripped through the room. Julian had never seen Liam angry like this before. Never loud, never cruel. But betrayal ages children quickly. Did everybody know except me? Liam asked shakily. "No." Julian answered immediately. "No one knew for certain. But you thought it." Silence. Liam looked at Evelyn then, and for the first time in his life, distrust entered his expression while looking at his mother. The sight visibly shattered her. "How long did you lie?" he whispered. Evelyn moved closer carefully. "I never wanted to hurt you." Liam laughed suddenly. "Small. Broken. That's what people say after they hurt someone." Julian felt physically sick, hearing his own emotional exhaustion echoed back through his child. Evelyn sat beside the bed cautiously. "I love you more than anything. Then why does everybody keep crying all the time?" No one answered, because there wasn't an answer children could survive hearing. Finally, Liam looked back at Julian. "So what happens now?" The question contained terror beyond his age. Not about biology, about abandonment. Julian understood immediately. And suddenly, none of the financial records or affairs or humiliation mattered compared to this moment. A frightened child asking whether love still counted after truth destroyed the story surrounding it. Julian leaned forward slowly. "Nothing changes between us." Liam's eyes filled. "But I'm not really yours." The sentence almost broke Julian apart. He took Liam's trembling hand firmly. "You are my son." Evelyn began sobbing openly behind them. Julian didn't look at her. "Blood matters to doctors," he said quietly. "It matters to paperwork. Maybe even courts sometimes." He swallowed hard. "But it's not the reason I love you." Liam started crying then. Not loudly, just silent tears sliding down a child's face, too exhausted to fully collapse anymore. "Promise?" Julian's own eyes burned suddenly. "I promise." Liam threw his arms around him immediately. Julian held him tightly while the boy shook against his chest. And in that moment, Julian understood something terrifying. The betrayal no longer hurt most, because Liam wasn't biologically his. It hurt because Evelyn's deception poisoned even this, one of the purest loves Julian had ever known. Across the room, Evelyn looked completely destroyed watching them together. Not excluded. Worse. Replaceable. Because despite biology, despite lies, despite Adrian, Liam still reached for Julian first. The realization hollowed something inside her permanently. Over the following days, the emotional damage spread through the house like smoke. Liam became quieter around Evelyn, not cruel, not openly angry, just distant. He stopped asking her for help with homework, stopped sitting beside her during movies, stopped telling her random thoughts before bed. Small absences, but devastating ones. Julian noticed Evelyn trying desperately to repair the connection. "Want pancakes?" she'd ask softly. "I'm okay. Can I drive you to school?" Dad already said he would. Every rejection cut visibly deeper. One evening, Julian found her crying alone in the laundry room while folding Liam's clothes. "He barely looks at me anymore," she whispered. Julian stood silently near the doorway. Part of him wanted to feel satisfaction. Instead, he only felt tired. "This is what lies do," he said quietly. Evelyn pressed trembling fingers against her eyes. "You think I don't know that?" "No," Julian replied honestly. "I think you knew and hoped you'd never have to pay for it." She looked at him then with unbearable sadness. "I did love you." Julian nodded once. "I know. That was the tragedy. If she had been purely manipulative, purely selfish, this would have been easier to survive emotionally. But Evelyn had loved him in the broken, cowardly way damaged people sometimes loved sincerely while still betraying everything important, which made the destruction feel horrifyingly human." Later that night, Julian tucked Liam into bed after another difficult day. Mom cried again. Liam murmured quietly into the darkness. Julian adjusted the blanket carefully. "She's having a hard time." "Are you?" Julian considered lying. Instead, "Yes." Liam stared at the ceiling for a long moment. Then softly, "Sometimes I wish I didn't know." Julian sat beside him quietly. Truth had consequences. Adults romanticized too easily. Sometimes it freed people. Sometimes it destroyed childhood permanently. Finally, Liam looked at him again. "You're still my real dad, though." Julian's throat tightened instantly. "Yeah," he whispered. "I am." Outside, snow drifted slowly over Chicago again, covering streets, rooftops, and frozen sidewalks in clean white silence. But inside the Mercer home, the damage could no longer be hidden beneath anything beautiful. And somewhere deep inside that collapsing marriage, Evelyn was beginning to realize the most painful truth of all. She had not only lost Julian, she was losing Liam, too. The invitation arrived embossed in silver. The Blackwell Foundation, Winter Gala, Annual Children's Medical Benefit, Grand Ballroom, the Drake Hotel formal attire required. Evelyn stared at the card for a long time after pulling it from the mail. "You're still going?" Julian asked from across the kitchen. His tone was neutral. Too neutral. Evelyn looked up carefully. "I'm on the board." Julian nodded once while sipping coffee. Of course. That answer unsettled her more than anger would have. For weeks now, Julian had become frighteningly calm. No screaming anymore, no emotional breakdowns, no impulsive accusations, just observation. Silence. Patience, like a man waiting for a clock only he could see. And somewhere deep inside herself, Evelyn knew patience was more dangerous than rage, especially from Julian. Because Julian Mercer never moved emotionally once he made a decision. The gala had always been Evelyn's territory. Chicago's elite filled the ballroom every January, surgeons, investors, old money, philanthropists, social media personalities pretending to care about children between champagne photographs. This was where Evelyn thrived. Beautiful dress, perfect smile, measured vulnerability. People loved her here. Or at least they loved the version of her carefully designed for rooms like this. The night of the event, snow drifted softly across downtown Chicago, while black luxury cars lined the hotel entrance beneath glowing gold lights. Inside, crystal chandeliers reflected against polished marble floors, while a jazz quartet played near the ballroom staircase. Everything looked expensive enough to hide moral failure temporarily. Julian arrived beside Evelyn dressed in a black tuxedo that made him appear sharper somehow. Harder. Controlled. Several people greeted them immediately. "Julian, Evelyn, you two look incredible. How's Liam doing?" Evelyn answered gracefully with practiced sadness. "He's improving slowly. We're grateful for all the support." Julian watched her perform without interruption, and somehow that frightened her more than confrontation ever had. Across the ballroom, Adrian stood near the donor tables speaking with hospital executives. The moment his eyes found Julian, something shifted visibly in his expression. Awareness, tension, fear, good, Julian thought calmly. Let him feel it now. Throughout the evening, whispers followed them gently, not scandal, yet merely curiosity. People sensed distance between Julian and Evelyn despite her efforts to appear polished. Marriages collapsing inside wealthy social circles always generated instinctive attention, especially beautiful marriages. Especially perfect ones. At 8:40 p.m., the foundation director approached the stage for opening remarks. Applause filled the ballroom. Julian glanced toward Evelyn. She smiled automatically beside him, one manicured hand resting lightly against his arm for appearances. The touch felt transactional now. After speeches began, Julian excused himself quietly. "I need air." Evelyn nodded distractedly while checking messages on her phone. She never noticed him walk toward the audiovisual control booth near the back corridor. But Adrian did, and suddenly the cardiologist looked genuinely alarmed. 10 minutes later, dinner service began. Wine flowed, conversations softened, laughter returned. Then the ballroom screens changed unexpectedly. At first, guests assumed another donor presentation was starting. But instead of charity slides, a bank statement appeared. Large, impossible to ignore. A C Medical Consulting Group, recurring transfers to Evelyn Mercer. The ballroom fell silent instantly. Confused murmurs spread between tables. Evelyn looked toward the screens in visible shock. What the hell? Another document appeared. Luxury apartment payments, school tuition assistance, private travel expenses, all linked financially to Adrian Cole. The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Adrian stood abruptly. "Turn this off." But no one moved, because Julian Mercer had already stepped onto the stage. And for the first time that evening, the room truly understood something terrible was happening. Evelyn stared at her husband in horror. Not emotional horror, strategic horror. Because suddenly she understood this had been planned. Carefully. Methodically. For months. Julian took the microphone calmly. No shaking hands. No visible rage. That composure terrified her most. "I apologize for interrupting tonight's event," he said evenly. "But since this foundation claims to support integrity and family health transparency, suddenly feels appropriate." The ballroom became perfectly still. Some guests already recognized the financial records on screen. Others pulled out phones immediately. Adrian moved toward the stage. "Julian, don't do this." Julian looked at him briefly. Then another slide appeared. Confidential paternity consultation. 8 weeks before wedding. Gasps spread audibly now. Evelyn's face lost all color. "No," she whispered. Julian continued speaking with horrifying calm. "For nearly a decade, my wife maintained an affair with Dr. Adrian Cole while allowing me to raise a child whose paternity she intentionally concealed." The sentence detonated through the ballroom. People turned instinctively toward Evelyn and Adrian. Whispers exploded instantly. "Oh my God. Jesus Christ. Is that true?" Evelyn stood frozen beneath hundreds of eyes, suddenly stripping away the identity she spent years building. Social standing was fragile in rooms like this. Not because wealthy people valued morality deeply, but because they feared scandal publicly. And tonight, scandal had arrived starving. Adrian stepped onto the stage finally. "Enough!" Julian turned toward him slowly. "You funded parts of my family's life for 7 years. I was trying to protect Liam." "No," Julian answered sharply. "You were trying to preserve access without responsibility." That landed visibly. Several board members exchanged horrified looks nearby. Especially after another document appeared on screen. Donations routed through foundation accounts connected indirectly to Adrian's transfers. Not technically illegal, but ethically catastrophic. One hospital administrator looked physically ill. A woman near the front whispered, "This could trigger an investigation." Exactly, Julian thought. Evelyn finally moved toward the stage, tears streaming openly now. "Please stop." The room watched hungrily. Public humiliation possessed its own cruelty, especially among elite circles pretending sophistication while feeding emotionally on destruction. Julian looked at her quietly. For one brief second, genuine sadness crossed his face. Because despite everything, he once loved this woman enough to trust her with his entire future. Then he remembered Liam crying in bed asking if he still belonged to him. The sadness disappeared. "You lied to me before we were even married," Julian said into the microphone. Evelyn shook violently. "I was scared. You manipulated medical timelines." "I know. You let another man secretly finance our life." "I know. You watched me build my identity around a family built on deception." By now, several people were openly recording on their phones. Chicago scandals traveled fast. By morning, this would spread through charity boards, hospital administrations, private school, parent groups, social circles, everywhere. Evelyn realized it too. Her breathing became uneven. "Julian," she whispered desperately, "please." But he was no longer looking at her. He looked toward the audience instead. "You all spent years telling us we were the perfect family." The ballroom remained deathly silent. "The truth is simpler," One person loved honestly. Two people lied because the truth threatened their comfort. Adrian's composure finally cracked. You think this makes you noble? Julian met his eyes calmly. No, I think it makes me finished. That sentence changed everything, because suddenly everyone understood this wasn't emotional revenge anymore. It was an execution. Social, professional, personal. And Julian had orchestrated it with terrifying precision. Near the ballroom entrance, two foundation board members were already speaking urgently with legal counsel. Another donor quietly walked out. Then, another. The collapse had begun. Evelyn looked around helplessly as years of influence evaporated in real time. Women who once hugged her warmly avoided eye contact now. Friends stepped backward. Conversations stopped when she approached. Not because society hated betrayal, but because public disgrace was contagious. And Evelyn had become radioactive. Finally, she looked back at Julian. Not angry anymore, broken. How long, she whispered painfully. How long have you been planning this? Julian answered honestly. Since the night I opened the DNA results. Evelyn closed her eyes. The room blurred around her, because in that moment she understood the full scale of what had happened. While she desperately tried saving appearances, Julian had quietly dismantled her entire world, piece by piece. And now, in front of Chicago's wealthiest and most powerful people, he had pulled the final trigger. By morning, Chicago already knew. Not quietly, not privately, completely. The gala videos spread across social media before sunrise. Grainy phone recordings captured every devastating moment. The financial records on giant ballroom screens. Julian's controlled voice, Evelyn crying beneath chandelier lights while donors stared in horror. By noon, local blogs began posting headlines. Prominent children's charity board member linked to long-term affair and financial scandal. Chicago cardiologist faces ethics questions after gala explosion. The comments were merciless. People who once praised Evelyn's elegance now dissected her morality publicly. Parents from Liam's school whispered during pickup lines. Invitations disappeared. Messages stopped. Within 48 hours, the Blackwell Foundation requested Evelyn's immediate resignation from the board. They called it protecting organizational integrity. Translation: You embarrass us now. Adrian's collapse came slower and somehow crueler. The hospital administration launched an internal ethics review regarding undisclosed financial entanglements connected to donor accounts and patient-family relationships. Medical boards began asking questions. Colleagues stopped defending him publicly. Some still respected his career. None wanted association with scandal. Especially not scandal involving secrecy money and paternity deception. The irony wasn't lost on Julian. For years, Adrian and Evelyn had protected appearances above everything else. Now appearances were killing them. 2 weeks after the gala, Evelyn moved into a luxury rental apartment downtown overlooking the river. Beautiful, cold, temporary. The condo she once curated obsessively for magazine-worthy perfection now belonged emotionally to Julian and Liam. Not through court orders yet, through reality. Liam refused to stay overnight with her. At first, he claimed exhaustion from treatments, then schoolwork, then headaches. Eventually, he stopped inventing excuses. I just want to stay home, he said quietly during one painful family therapy session. Home. Not mom's place. Not Evelyn's apartment. Home. The word visibly shattered her. Julian watched silently from across the therapist's office, while Evelyn tried not to cry. But Liam noticed anyway. Children always noticed. I'm not trying to hurt you, he whispered. Evelyn finally broke down completely then. Not socially acceptable tears. Not controlled sadness, real grief. I know, she said shakily. I know. But knowing changed nothing, because betrayal did not only destroy trust between spouses, it altered gravity inside families, and some relationships never recovered their original shape afterward. One snowy afternoon in February, Julian sat inside his attorney's office reviewing custody documents, while Liam colored quietly beside the window. The legal process had become surprisingly efficient after the gala. Public scandal weakened negotiation leverage dramatically, especially when evidence existed. Especially when Julian remained calm throughout every proceeding, while Evelyn appeared emotionally unstable and publicly disgraced. Vanessa Holloway closed another folder neatly. She's agreeing to primary residential custody. Julian nodded slowly. Not victory exactly. Something sadder. Across the room, Liam looked up suddenly. Can we still go to Maine this summer? The question caught Julian off guard. Every July since Liam turned 4, they rented the same small cottage near the coast of Maine. Lobster rolls, rainstorms, board games during foggy evenings. Simple things. Stable things. Julian smiled faintly for the first time in weeks. Yeah, buddy, we can still go. Liam returned to coloring quietly. Vanessa watched the interaction with careful understanding. He loves you, she said after a moment. Julian looked toward the window. I know. And you love him. That answer came instantly. More than anything. Vanessa leaned back slightly. Then biology stopped mattering a long time ago. Julian realized she was right. The DNA results destroyed his marriage, not his fatherhood. That distinction saved him emotionally. Months passed. Winter softened into early spring. The city thawed slowly. And so did Julian. Not completely. Some wounds remained permanently structural. He still woke occasionally at 3 a.m., remembering the hospital corridor, the envelope, the sentence that split his life into before and after. But pain changed over time. Initially, it screamed. Eventually, it echoed. One Saturday morning in April, Julian and Liam walked together beside the lakefront near downtown Chicago. Cold wind rolled off the water, while joggers passed beneath pale sunlight. Liam looked healthier now, more color in his face, more energy in his movements. Healing. Both of them were healing. Can I ask something? Liam said quietly. Julian glanced down. Always. Liam kicked lightly at leftover snow near the sidewalk. Do you wish you never met Mom? The question settled heavily between them. Julian thought about it carefully. About wedding vows. About lies. About humiliation. About years stolen by deception. Then he looked at his son. No, he answered honestly. Liam frowned slightly. Why? Because then I wouldn't have you. Liam grew quiet after that, then slowly slipped his hand into Julian's coat pocket, the way he used to as a little kid. The gesture nearly broke Julian's heart. Across the street inside a parked black SUV, Evelyn watched them. Neither knew she was there. She had seen them accidentally while leaving a nearby cafe. At first, she almost called out, then stopped herself. Instead, she remained motionless behind tinted windows, watching the two people she loved most walk beside the frozen lake together. Without her, Julian laughed softly at something Liam said. Liam smiled. Natural. Safe. A father and son moving forward through cold sunlight. And suddenly, Evelyn understood the full truth more clearly than ever before. Julian had not won because he exposed her publicly. He won because Liam still trusted him after everything. That was the loss she would never recover from. Not the marriage, not the penthouse, not the charity boards or social invitations. Those things were replaceable. But trust, especially a child's trust, was almost sacred once broken. Tears blurred her vision quietly. She remembered the younger version of herself years earlier, terrified and pregnant, convincing herself one lie could protect everyone. Then another lie, then another, until deception became architecture. And now she sat alone, watching the ruins. Inside the SUV, her phone vibrated again. Another journalist requesting comment. Another former friend distancing herself politely. Another consequence. Evelyn silenced the phone without reading the message. Outside, Julian and Liam continued walking farther down the shoreline beneath soft gray skies. At one point, Liam slipped slightly on ice. Julian caught him immediately without thinking. Instinct. Love. The kind built through years, not blood. Evelyn closed her eyes briefly, because at last she understood the cruelest truth of all. The family she spent years trying to preserve through lies had actually been destroyed by those lies long before the gala ever happened. And the moment she chose deception over honesty, she had already begun losing them. By the time she realized it, Julian and Liam were too far away to call back.